Welcome to Arcania, the complete tale on PS4. And this game got pretty bad reviews, so I thought I'd show some things that were good about it, mainly the combat, which is most of the game. Most of the game is combat. So I went for a melee build, which means I focused almost exclusively on using sword-based weaponry. There are two types of sword-based weaponry. There are heavy swords and lighter swords. We're using a lighter sword because it hits faster. And the enemies follow a basic design premise that never really changes. The enemies have light attacks that you can cancel using your own light attacks. And they have heavy attacks that can only be cancelled with a heavy attack or rolled out of. They telegraph their heavy attacks really well. As soon as you see them glow, take a deep breath, or do anything unusual, they're preparing for a heavy attack and you need to roll out of the way. It may seem a little easy because the heavy attacks are so well telegraphed, but actually, since there are so many enemies, it can become difficult to keep track of all their heavy attacks, especially the ones that knock you over. Like that. The enemies also predictably have different roles, like the shaman back there will fire magic bolts at me while I'm trying to melee attack the demon, so we want to get rid of him so he can't shoot me in the back with magic. All of the enemies are capable of blocking, and if they block, you can either break their block with a heavy attack, or simply just wait until they stop blocking. I usually choose the latter option, because anytime you go for a heavy attack, you're leaving yourself open. So the core design of the melee combat is extremely simple. You wail on them with square until you see a heavy attack is about to occur, then you press triangle to roll out of the way, sometimes multiple rolls if the attack is really big, and then you roll back and hit more. This becomes exponentially more difficult when there are multiple large enemies with wide area attacks as their heavy attacks, which is why we lured this guy out separate from the rest of the group so we didn't have to fight him with a bunch of others, because that would be disastrous. You can draw aggro from enemies by hitting them with your bow from a distance, which is very useful, but you need to be aware of which enemy you're shooting with the bow, because some of them charge right at you really fast after they're shot with a bow, and they will knock you over and stun lock you. You can get out of the stun lock if you try really hard, but you still need to keep that in mind. These ladies with bat wings, they are very weak to melee attacks. We can easily stun lock them with our melee attacks, no problem. The game also implements a combo system using entirely the square button, where if we press the square button at just the right time, we do flurry attacks which deal extra damage at the cost of some stamina. This is basically just, a bare bones press square at the right time to hit harder sort of situation. But there is some slight nuance to it in the fact that if you use one of said flurry attacks, you create a small opening for the enemies. A very small opening, but still it's there. The flurry attack system is fun. Timing the button press at just the right time to do your combo better is satisfying. It's more difficult when you're surrounded by enemies for obvious reasons because your brain has way too many things to pay attention to. So falling back on mashing square is also a valid option in that situation. I feel it's worth mentioning that this is by far not the only build you can go with. I put pretty much every single point I've ever gotten into melee and stamina. So that's why I'm fighting exclusively using melee weaponry and occasionally the bow and arrow, but very rarely, usually just to draw aggro, which isn't working so well right now. Usually these shamans get frustrated and charge at you, but that clearly isn't happening. You can go for a stealth archer build, if you like, which is a very valid option and probably the easiest way to play the game, if we're being honest. You can also go with a mage build, which requires buying scrolls with spells etched into them and leveling up your spell casting. Or you can do another melee build that uses heavy weaponry, which I tried but wasn't a big fan of because it meant I couldn't dodge as good. I get the feeling the path I chose is the path of most resistance. If we're being honest, I feel like this all melee light weapon build probably the hardest way to play the game. It certainly seems that way. I feel like the stealth archer build would be the easiest because the bow deals massive damage, especially when your enemies don't see you. And we've stun locked this monster, which is not a rare occurrence if you get a monster backed against a wall and just keep mashing square. But anyway, I feel like the build I chose is probably the hardest way to play the game, but I really like to hit things. So that's why I decided to play the game this way. And the game gives you plenty of time and opportunities to, you know, choose magic, or choose archery, or choose heavy weaponry. I just ignored those choices, so this is all on me. It's not the game's fault in any way, shape, or form. I just wanted to do it this way. You know, you could also go with a mix of all the combat options. That might be the healthiest choice, instead of going all in on one thing. But I kind of wanted to go all in on one thing. I always feel like games like this are weird, because everyone's going to have a vastly different experience playing it. Even though this is a fairly linear game, the methods of attack you have are pretty varied, so the game's going to seem entirely different depending on which way you approach the combat situations. Like, to a guy playing a stealth archer build, this game is going to be completely different than the way I'm doing things right now. By the way, the stealth is really lenient. It's like, you know, standard, janky, European RPG stealth, so it works really well in your favor.